Welcome back to the Addison, the 35th podcast. I'm Ryan Herrera, your host for this Cubs specific episode. First solo show since we launched this thing, so bear with me. But let's go ahead and get right into it. Since we talked last, the Cubs were 0-2 coming off that series in Tokyo, finished out the last week of spring training, and we're heading into Phoenix for a 4-game set with Arizona before heading up to Sacramento and facing the A's their first time playing in their AAA stadium. Cubs were 0-2 at that point in time. They have now flipped it. They are 5-4. They're above 500 after 9 games. A lot better place than they were a week ago or even a few days ago. And one of the main things that happened over that last week was the emergence or the reemergence, I guess, of Kyle Tucker and Seiya Suzuki at the top of the lineup. Now, the Cubs offense has been pretty good, actually looked pretty good. They scored 35 runs in Sacramento the last 3 games. They scored 21 runs in Arizona. Their offense has been pretty hot. They're in top 10 in a lot of different offensive categories. Still pretty early on in the season, of course, but good things coming from that offense. And again, Kyle Tucker and Seiya Suzuki up there in the top of the lineup. Now, Kyle Tucker was the big offseason addition for the Cubs. Only had the 1 year, traded 2024 first round pick Cam Smith, former All-Star third baseman Isaac Paredes, and Hayden Wesneski, who we do know is someone that has shown flashes of being an effective major league pitcher. Those three guys obviously have a lot of team control. Traded that to Houston and brought back Kyle Tucker, former All-Star, of course, one of the best players in the league, a superstar is what we'd like to say. The Cubs haven't had that superstar the last few years after a couple seasons where they didn't reach the playoffs at the end of the season. They did add that superstar bat, former Gold Glover. A guy like Kyle Tucker, you don't get to add that often. So the Cubs went and pulled the trigger and brought him in. Obviously, the concern is that he only has 1 year on his deal. So they do only have club control over Tucker for this one season, the 2025 season. Still remains to be seen if they'll extend him or even re-sign him in the offseason, but they do have him right now. And so I want to talk about Kyle Tucker because in his first 4 games, 2 for 16. That obviously includes the 2 games in Tokyo, the first couple games in Arizona against the Diamondbacks. Not the best start, but very, very small sample size. But one of the things that also happened around that time was Cam Smith was raking in spring training with the Astros and actually ended up making their opening day roster. And, a lot of Cubs Twitter wasn't too happy about that, especially with Kyle Tucker not having the fastest start in his Cubs uniform. But over the last 5 games, 10 for 21 batting average, 10 for 21 at the plate. The batting average is high. He's hitting 324, on base percentage 444, 784 slugging, 229 WRC plus, homered in 4 straight games over the last week, a 13.3% strikeout rate, super low with a 17.8% walk rate. I mean, Kyle Tucker looks like the superstar hitter that the Cubs were trying to bring in. Again, it's only 9 games. It's super early on in the season, not even a tenth of the way done with the baseball season. But Kyle Tucker is looking a lot more like the hitter the Cubs thought they were getting than maybe the first couple games. And again, that's, he had his spring training struggles. He had hitless games over the first few games, but now Kyle Tucker is looking like that guy. But right behind him, or at points in front of him in the lineup, is Seiya Suzuki, who has a 162 WRC plus, 275, hitting 275 with a 333 on base percentage and a 625 slugging. He's got 4 home runs himself with 2 homers on Wednesday. He does have a 37.8% strikeout rate, which is just higher than it needs to be. But he's at an 8.9% walk rate, a little bit lower than where he usually is. But again, early in the season, those 2 guys at the top of the lineup for the Cubs, the top of the Cubs offense. I mean, those guys, obviously Ian Happ is leading off and setting the table and hasn't had the best start for himself. But Ian Happ's a guy that over the last 3 years has been pretty consistent offensively, putting up very similar numbers over 3 seasons. Was an all-star a couple years ago. Ian Happ is probably one of those guys that you feel comfortable setting the table over the long haul over the season. But Kyle Tucker and Seiya Suzuki. Suzuki is another guy that through his first 5 games, he was 2 for 21, wasn't looking too great at the plate. But over his last 4 games, they were all multi-hit games. He's 9 for 19. Like I said, he had the 2 home runs against the A's on was that Wednesday. Kyle Tucker and Seiya Suzuki right there at the top of the order. Those 2 guys, hitting the way that we know they can hit. Like again, Kyle Tucker for seasons now has been one of the best hitters in the league. Last season he was right there as well. He just, he just didn't have the health. He missed about half the season due to injury. Now he's back, and at least to start the year, he's raking. Seiya Suzuki's raking. Like those two guys. Suzuki's a guy that we have seen the peaks and the valleys from him. We've seen very, very long stretches of him looking like inarguably one of the best hitters in baseball. We've also seen those stretches where he's striking out a lot more. He's not getting balls to fall. He just doesn't look like the same hitter at the plate. He has had those. And over the last few seasons, it's kind of been a test of can he be more consistently really good at the plate and limit those stretches where he hasn't been hitting the ball as well. Again, 9 games into the season, but Kyle Tucker and Seiya Suzuki are looking like a 2-3. Suzuki hitting second against left-handed pitchers, left-handed starters, and then Kyle Tucker hitting second against righties. That's been the way that Craig Counsell has been inserting them in the lineup the first 9 games. If those two guys are hitting the way that we know that they can be hitting, they know they can be hitting, the Cubs know they can be hitting. Those are two scary, very strong hitters hitting second and third for the Cubs in that lineup. And, that's going to help extend the lineup a little bit more. Like, again, bringing in Kyle Tucker, maybe that's helped Suzuki even more, having Kyle Tucker either right in front of him or right behind him, because Kyle Tucker is that guy, that superstar bat that can take a lot of attention from opposing pitchers. So you like seeing what those guys have done at the plate, especially over the last 4 or 5 games. And you obviously hope that extends well into the season. But those two guys at the top of the order hitting the way they've been hitting, that is a dangerous 1-2 punch right there, hitting second or third. Whichever combination that Craig Counsell puts out there on a daily basis, that can be a very dangerous 1-2 punch for the Cubs. And we've seen that over the last 4 or 5 games. I mean, Kyle Tucker putting big swings on the ball, hitting home runs. He's got 4. Seiya Suzuki's broken out with his own 4 home runs, hitting the ball hard. I mean, I think the quote that Pete Armstrong gave to reporters in Arizona was something like that: pound for pound has some of the best power in the league, something along those lines. And we've seen that over the last few seasons, but he has come in over the last couple of games and has shown that he hits the ball real hard. I'm trying to look at it. Suzuki, he's got a barrel rate of 20.8%, hard hit rate of 54.2%. And then right there with him is Kyle Tucker, 25.8% barrel rate and a hard hit rate of 41.9%. These guys are really good hitters. These guys, they're not always going to be on the way they do. I mean, Kyle Tucker's 229 WRC plus, Seiya's a 162 WRC plus. You can't expect that. Those won't. Very, very unlikely. Kyle Tucker's is just well beyond where it's going to be at the end of the season. Suzuki's, you'd expect that to fall a little bit. However much that falls, you don't expect them to be at that level for the long haul over an entire season. But I mean, those guys have shown in their careers that they can be that top of the order, heart of the lineup, guys that can carry a team, carry an offense through a long stretch of time. And so you really like what you've seen from Kyle Tucker and Seiya Suzuki right here at the top of the order, and leading the Cubs right now. Like I said, 5-4. They managed to split 2 games in Arizona. We'll get to the last loss in that series in a bit, but the Cubs put up 35 runs in Sacramento against the A's. They outscored the A's 35-6, I believe it was, or something along those lines, or 35-9, something along those lines. They scored 35 runs against the Athletics in Sacramento. And I don't know if that is just how Sacramento plays, if that ballpark plays and it's just a major hitter's ballpark. But we've, over the last couple of years, with most of this lineup, we have seen stretches where this Cubs offense can be like one of the best in baseball. We've seen that with guys like Ian Happ and Seiya Suzuki, Nico Horner, Dansby Swanson. Like, they have their stretches. They just haven't consistently put it all together, especially last season. A couple months, it felt like a stretch where the Cubs offense just couldn't get anything going consistently game to game. And that helped sink them early in the season, where they dug themselves a hole they couldn't get out of after a while. Now, the Cubs, again, still early in the season, 5-4, 9 games in. But if this offense can do what it did what it's done so far through April against a lot of tough pitching. You got Dodgers, you got the Padres coming into town. You have another series in San Diego. Like, you got a lot of tough pitching coming up, but they've faced some good pitchers and have put up some good numbers. So if they can do that, like, you look back at 2024, had a great April offensively. May and June was not as good offensively. This season they can stretch what they've done the last few games throughout April, and then not let that May and June swoon come. You're looking at an offense that can have this team right in the thick of the NL Central race. Right now, they're in second place behind the Cardinals early in the season, but the way that this offense can be, the potential this offense has, that this is an offense that can have the Cubs in the thick of a playoff race, of a division race throughout the season, and definitely into September. So I think you like overall what you've seen from the offense. Nico Horner and Dansby Swanson, two guys who just didn't have that offensive performance that you needed from them last season, had their offseason surgeries. Nico Horner didn't even make the trip to Tokyo as he stayed back to keep ramping up in minor league games. Those two guys have had a good first week or so in the major league season. Again, I mentioned Ian Happ hasn't had the best start, but he's someone that you expect to get going. Pico Armstrong and Matt Shaw, two really young guys that the Cubs are going to be counting on to produce this season, defensively and offensively. Also haven't had the greatest of starts. Like Pico Armstrong right now, as I sit here recording this Thursday night, 69 WRC plus. You saw what Pico Armstrong did in the last 2 or so months of last season. Just looked like a completely different hitter, a much improved hitter. And he carried that into spring training, had a really good spring training, but that's kind of on the flip side of Kyle Tucker's, where you don't necessarily look at spring training as evidence that he's going to struggle, and he's shown that he hasn't. On the flip side, like Pico Armstrong hasn't carried the spring training success that he had into the start of the season, but I think there's some confidence there that he can pick things up. He's looked like a better hitter than he was when he was really struggling last season at the plate. He looked like he's having better at bats, maybe putting the ball in the air a little bit too much, but fly ball wise. But I think he's someone you have confidence that can pick it up and be a productive hitter in his basically second full season with the Cubs. And then Matt Shaw, rookie, he's faced a lot of good pitching to start out his major league career. He's got an 87 WRC plus. Has had those at bats where he just looks overmatched. Has had some good at bats. Has put the bat on the ball. He does have a home run on his resume now. And he's another guy that he's a rookie. It's going to take him some time to get acclimated to big league pitching. I have already seen the discourse about the batting stance, which is wacky. It is a little bit weird. I'll give him that. I'll give you that. But I think he's someone that has hit at every single level with that stance, right? With that batting stance, has every level he's moved up, whether that's college to the minor leagues, single A, double A, triple A, whatever it is. Like, he has figured out how to hit at every level. And I think you can give him some benefit of the doubt that the longer he's at the major league level, the more major league at bats he gets, he will be able to go and learn how it is hitting against major league pitching and have some success. So that's probably going to take some time. Like, I don't think anyone expected Matt Shaw to bust out and have this electric offensive start. You would have loved to have had that if you're a Cubs fan, or if you're the Cubs, or if you're Matt Shaw himself, right? But I think it's no shock that he's had some struggles here to start the season. But you can have some confidence there that he's going to start finding more success at the plate, the more at bats, the more plate appearances, the more experience he has facing major league pitchers. One whole position group, two players that I haven't mentioned when it comes to the offense is the Cubs catchers. I do want to highlight what the Cubs catchers have done so far this season. That would obviously be Miguel Amaya and Carson Kelly. Compared to 2024, let's do that. The catching group for the Cubs in 2024 was Miguel Amaya, Yan Gomes, Tomas Nido, and Christian Bethancourt. They ended up with a negative 0.2 WAR according to Fangraphs, which was 29th, a 69 WRC plus, which was 26th, 0.601 OPS, which was 26th, a 215 average, 24th, and actually ended up with -9 fielding run value according to StatCast, which was 25th That's a defensive stat, but that was also 25th. Just not good production on either side of the ball from the Cubs catching group in 2024. And that is even including the last couple months where Miguel Amaya figured out hitting at the big level, and he had a really big second half. And then Christian Bethancourt, when they picked him up, he provided the Cubs with a pretty good number two in that stretch, which it was the stretch where the Cubs were winning a lot more games, were starting to make a little bit of a comeback in that playoff race. But he provided them that good number two behind Amaya. And so even those numbers, which are near the bottom of the league, are improved from what we saw in the first 4 months with Amaya, Gomes, and Nito. So the catching group was just not productive for the Cubs last season, and you saw that whether that was from on the defensive side or in the lineup. There was a lot of improvement needed and a lot more production needed from the catching group. So far through the first 9 games, again, Miguel Amaya and Carson Kelly, that group has produced 0.6 F4, which is second in baseball, a 193 WRC plus, which is fifth, a 1077 OPS, fourth, and a 344 average, fifth in baseball. Pretty good flip from what we saw from the Cubs catching group last season. Miguel Amaya specifically, 20 plate appearances over 5 games. He's hitting 300 on base percentage, 500 slugging percentage, and a 123 WRC plus. And then Carson Kelly, 18 plate appearances over 4 games, a 417 average, a 556 on base percentage, and a 917 slugging percentage with a 270 WRC plus. Just productive all around from the Cubs catching group so far this season. I will say, I mean, of course, those numbers are incredibly high, especially Carson Kelly. Like a 270 WRC plus is really, really good, but also, again, in a 4-game sample size. Like Carson Kelly, just hitting in general, and Carson Kelly as a hitter over his career, that number is going to fall. Miguel Amaya, 123 WRC plus, like that would be fantastic if he produced that over a full season, but I don't think you can expect him to do that. I think you can expect that number to fall some as well. I will say that, Miguel Amaya's batting average on balls in play, 376, and then Carson Kelly's batting average on balls in play at 364. Those are rather high. Those are pretty high numbers as far as BABIP goes. So I think you expect to see those two numbers regress as well for the both of them, and that probably will lead to some worse offensive numbers. But we're talking about the first 9 games here, right? Like I think you deal with that when it gets there. If you're the Cubs, instead, right now you're looking at 9 games where your catching group has produced just massively better than what you experienced with your catching group last season. I think that's a huge positive. Miguel Amaya, he's a guy that's similar to Pete Crow Armstrong, hit his stride in the last 2 months of last season, the last 2.5 months or so, splitting time again with the likes of Bethancourt and some of these other catchers. He kind of found a stride over the last couple months of the season, the second half of the season, and looked like a different hitter. And he's another guy that had a pretty strong spring, and the hope was that he could carry that into the season and be a much more productive hitter over the long haul. And so far, he's done that. And then Carson Kelly was the Cubs' veteran catcher addition. They knew they needed to add a veteran catcher and someone that can be productive, splitting time with Amaya, basically a 1A, 1B tandem. That's how it's worked out. And Carson Kelly has done really well. I mean, he hit a cycle. I don't remember if that was Monday or Tuesday. I think it was Monday night in Sacramento. Hit for the cycle, the first Cubs cycle since '93. I think he'd had like 2 triples in his career. And so the odds that he was going to hit for the cycle at all were probably pretty slim, and he goes out and does it. And with Amaya has been a pretty good pairing for the catchers, whether that's, particularly at the plate. Like that's been huge for the Cubs. And when we talk about this offense and the way it's performed so far this season, those two getting off to really good starts has been pretty massive for them. But on the flip side, the pitching just hasn't been as good as the Cubs would have hoped it would be, right? Coming off the way the starting pitchers performed last season, like you knew that there might be some regression from the starters. They had really good numbers last year, but of course that also included them pitching or pitching half their games in a ballpark that the park factor was much more on the pitcher side than on the hitter side. It was much more of a pitcher's ballpark than a hitter's ballpark last season. And I do think that that benefited the starting pitchers, whether that's Justin Steele, Shota Imanaga, Kyle Hendricks, Jameson Taillon, Javier Assad, and other guys that started games for the Cubs last year. That was a big benefit. And I mean, of course, the Cubs haven't even played at Wrigley Field yet. But I think over the long haul, over the season, there was definitely a chance for some regression from the starting pitchers over 162. And again, haven't played at Wrigley Field yet, but you have seen some struggles from the starters. Justin Steele specifically, he's going into this season. I mean, he was never a guy that allowed a ton of home runs. Like, I think it's his first season there, 2023, the year he finished fifth in Cy Young voting. The guy didn't give up his fifth home run, I believe, until after the All-Star break, the fifth home run of the season until after the All-Star break. Last season, he got hurt on opening day, came back, and very soon after his return, there was a two-game stretch where he faced the Pirates twice. And I believe he gave up 5 home runs in that stretch, but it was coming off an injury that kept him out for a little over a month, and he was fine after that. He wasn't the home runs weren't a terrible part of his repertoire of what happened to him throughout the season last year. This year, we're getting through his first 3 starts, he's already given up 5 home runs. That's the one in LA. That's the one in Tokyo against LA, the one in Arizona, and then one in Sacramento. He has given up 5 home runs through 3 starts. That's concerning. I would say that's concerning in that, again, Justin Steele is just not a guy that has given up the long ball to a very large extent over the last couple of years since he kind of emerged as the Cubs ace, as this top of the rotation guy for the Cubs. The long ball home runs just haven't been a part of his game, that he just hasn't gotten hit like that. And so to see it, he did give up the 2 in Tokyo, 1 in Arizona, and then 2 against the A's. Yeah, that is concerning to start out the season. But going off his last start against the A's, he did still grind to 6 2/3 innings pitched, did give up the 4 runs, but found a way to settle in there, grind out a start, cover a bunch of innings, and pick up the win. And that's another part of Justin Steele as a pitcher, and that I think we have seen examples of Justin Steele just going out there, may not have his best stuff, his best performance, his best command, whatever it is, best control, but he's found ways to grind through starts, go 6 or 7 innings, keep the Cubs in a position where they can either have a leader all right in there and can hand it off to the bullpen. And while I that's a good sign from Justin Steele. That's a good sign from him after giving up his 5th home run to settle in there and get that 6 2/3 inning. That's the kind of guy that you've seen Justin Steele become over the last few years when he has emerged as a top of the rotation pitcher. He's a guy that can grind out a start and give you a bunch of innings and still go out there and feel not terrible about the start. And that's what the Cubs need at the top of the order, of course, or top of the rotation, of course, with Steele. They're expecting Steele to go out there and be that guy he's been when healthy the last 2 seasons. Right now, he's sitting at a 6.89 ERA through his first 3 starts. I don't expect that to be anywhere near that by the end of the season. I do expect Justin Steele, again, provided health. We'll knock on wood for him, but I do expect Justin Steele's numbers to vastly improve as we go along the season. I'm not sure what has led to the home runs. It may just be mistakes on pitches. I do know he has been mixing in his more secondary pitches a lot more than he has been the last few seasons. He's got so far with his pitch mix, sinkers have made up 8.1% of his pitches, curveballs 6.3%, and changeups 3.6%. That's a higher rate than what Steele has thrown than 2024. I mean, 2023, it was 96% of his pitches were 4-seamer slider. So he is mixing in more of his secondary pitches. 2 of his home runs have come off the 4-seamer, 2 have come off the slider, and 1 off the changeup. So it's not like his sinker and curveball are getting hit to an extent. Those are the ones giving up the home runs. He has gotten hit a little bit with his main two pitches. I don't know if that's if expanding the repertoire has impacted him at all or not. That's maybe something that Justin can expand upon, or something that we'll see or continue to monitor throughout the season. But it hasn't been the best start for Justin Steele so far to start the season. I believe he is 2-1, so his team has had his back and picked him up, and I think that's something that we also saw last year with Steele. That um, even in some of his best starts, he wasn't always getting the runs from his offense, wasn't always getting the backing from his offense or even his bullpen, and that kind of limited his win total. But so you're seeing a little bit of the flip from that with Steele than last season. So I sit here and I expect Justin Steele to be Justin Steele by the end of the season. Like when we sit here at the end of the year, I expect that we'll say Justin Steele had another really good season and he was a strong pitcher for the Cubs at the top of the rotation. But that is a little bit of a concern there that Steele just hasn't quite looked like himself. The home run, which hasn't been a big issue with him over the last couple of years, has been an issue with him through his first three starts. I think that's just something that we're going to have to keep looking at. That's something we're just going to have to monitor with Justin as the season goes on and see if he can obviously keep the ball in the ballpark, but then continue to lower the ERA, lower the WHIP, keep going out and pitching 6-7 innings, getting those quality starts. That's what we know Justin Steele to be as a pitcher from the last couple of seasons, and I think that Justin Steele will get there sooner rather than later. I do obviously want to talk about the bullpen. The bullpen has overall, when you look at the numbers, bullpen hasn't been great. You get a 5.91 ERA, which is 25th in baseball. They do have a negative 0.2 WAR according to Fangraphs, also 25th in baseball. Just like the raw numbers just haven't looked the best for the bullpen. And coming off with the bullpen, what happened with the bullpen last season, especially for the first half of the year, and just the Cubs. I mean, missing on Tanner Scott, who was a big free agent during the offseason, adding Ryan Presley. They added a bunch of new arms: Presley, Ryan Brazier, Eli Morgan, Nate Pearson is the guy they got at the trade deadline last season. Like I understand why Cubs fans may have already had some concerns over the bullpen or just nerves, or when the team hands it over to the bullpen, they're just a little bit nervous or on edge a little bit when the bullpen comes in, because that was a theme from last season where the bullpen, until they started to figure it out over the last maybe couple months or so, last 2 months of 2024, there were a lot of times where the bullpen, you didn't know if you could trust them game to game. And so you come into this the beginning of this season and you see those types of numbers, and then you see on Sunday, like I mentioned, the Cubs split 2 in Arizona, could have had a 3-1 record leaving Arizona and going up to Sacramento. And then the bullpen came in. There was that the 8th inning on Sunday. I think Caleb Thielbar came in the bottom of the 7th in Arizona and was able to keep the score at 3-2 with the Cubs in the lead. Kyle Tucker comes up in the 8th and hits a 3-run homer to extend the lead to 4. And then Thielbar, Eli Morgan, and then Colin Ray all pitched in the 8th, and the Diamondbacks scored 8 runs and ultimately beat the Cubs. That was obviously a tough look for the bullpen. I will point out that right now, as I mentioned, 5.91 ERA, 32 innings, 21 earned runs allowed. If you do take out that one inning with the 8 earned runs, that does drop their ERA down to 3.77. So right now, in a small sample size of 9 games, that one inning is truly, raising that earned run average over 2 runs, or from 3.77 to 5.91. You obviously have to take the bad with the good. So you can't just take out one inning, because that is also part of the sample of what the bullpen has done. But I do think that I do think that this bullpen, the additions they did make, can be better. We saw it get better, obviously in Arizona, in Sacramento. Monday, 4 innings pitched, no runs. Tuesday, 2 1/3, and then Wednesday, 3 innings, no runs. I mean, the bullpen looked a lot better in Sacramento when they got their chances, and they weren't all high leverage innings. Of course, there was obviously on Tuesday, um, the 7-4 win for the Cubs, and they did have their high leverage arms in, but I think the way that bullpen performed in Sacramento against the A's, it looks a little bit more like what we can expect from some of these pitchers, right? Like Nate Pearson is someone that had a couple struggles his first couple times out, but he's also someone that earned a lot of trust from Craig Counsell and that pitching and that coaching staff last season after he came over. I mean, a guy like Ryan Presley does have a 6.75 ERA. Um, I'm curious about the mix a little bit. The curveball is slightly his most thrown pitch, and that has been pretty good for him. He hasn't given up a hit on the curveball. He's got a 55.6% whiff rate. The four seamer has thrown a few pitches less than the curveball. Does have a 500 batting average against opponents, but the velo hasn't really dropped. Um, Ryan Presley is someone that, with the Astros, proved to be a pretty good bullpen arm. I mean, obviously he lost his spot when the Astros brought in Josh Hader and struggled a little bit in a new role, in a setup role. But I do think Ryan Presley is a guy that the Cubs brought in, believing in him as that back end ninth inning guy, closing opportunity guy. He's a veteran. He's a World Series champion. Like, he has the pedigree and the experience, and I do believe in Ryan Presley as the Cubs closer. Again, I mentioned Tanner Scott. Like, it would be great for the Cubs if they had or were able to bring in Tanner Scott. They weren't. Caleb Presley is their guy, and I do think that better days are ahead for Ryan Presley. The numbers haven't worked out so far. I mean, he has 4 walks and only 1 strikeout in 20 batters faced. So that's about a 20% walk rate. Like, that's got to drop. You'd love for him to get more strikeouts. And I do think Ryan Presley will get there as the season goes on. But I, again, understand the concerns over Ryan Presley, just the way that some of his first times pitching in a Cubs uniform have gone. But on the flip side, the other back end guy that the Cubs have, a guy that emerged last season, as we know, is Porter Hodge. Right now, heading into the home opener, he does have a 0.00 ERA. He's striking out. His strikeout rate is 31.3%, which is very strong strikeout rate right there. He does have about like a 12.5%, I believe, walk rate. That's high, and then you'd love for that to get lower, especially if he's someone that can emerge as the team's closer, right? Like, if, say, Ryan Presley struggles and loses that closer role, right? That's definitely a possibility. You feel confident in Porter Hodge, but you'd love for that walk rate to drop. But the sweeper, I mean, the four seamer, I think there's been points when Porter's pitched so far this year where the four seamer just hasn't necessarily been working, and he's gone more to that sweeper. He's actually thrown more sweepers than four seamers so far this season. So you've seen him kind of adjust mid game and maybe focus on the sweeper a little bit more and at a couple points. I mean, that sweeper's got a 37.5% whiff rate. Like, it's getting a lot of whiffs, and it's looked like a pretty nasty pitch for him. And I mean, Porter Hodge is a guy that emerged last season, kind of came up. And I remember Craig Counsell saying when they brought Porter Hodge up that it was probably a little bit fast for him. But he quickly settled in and became that back end guy for the Cubs, a guy that earned a lot of trust from Craig Counsell himself. And by the end of the season was closing games for him and doing a pretty good job of it. So Porter Hodge, relievers are one of those. I mean, relievers as a group are just the basically the most volatile position in baseball. Like, you don't always know what you're going to get from relievers on a year-to-year basis. Some guys have really good years and then struggle the next year and then bounce back. Like, that happens all the time with relievers. There's some guys out there. I've named Josh Hader. There's guys out there that just have consistent success across their careers in high leverage back end opportunities, but that's a lot more rare, I would say, than with most of the relievers that you see come through Major League Baseball. That Porter has had a pretty solid start to his second season in the big leagues is a good sign, and is another guy where I think the more experience he gets at this level, pitching at this level, just it feels like the better he's going to get pitching at this level, just with the more experience that he gets. And he's already had a solid start. So I remember Ryan Presley kind of saying when the Cubs got him that he felt like him and Porter could be a pretty good tandem right there in the back end of the bullpen. And while Presley's numbers don't say it yet, I think he's going to be just fine in this Cubs bullpen. Right now, Porter Hodges' numbers are saying that. And I do think that him and Ryan Presley will make up a pretty good 1-2 punch there. Whoever's closing games, right? If we get to August and for whatever reason Porter's closing games and Presley isn't, like that, maybe that happens, maybe it doesn't. Maybe Presley figures it out and is closing games for the rest of the year, and Porter Hodge is setting him up with the eighth inning for the rest of the year. I mean, that's obviously a possibility, and I think that's in a way kind of what the Cubs want, where Ryan Presley is getting a bulk of the save opportunities and having success, and Porter's right there backing him up, either setting up for him in the eighth inning or taking save opportunities when Ryan Presley maybe needs a day off or is just unavailable, right? I think the Cubs do want that to be where the bullpen looks, or how the bullpen looks over the long haul, over the 2025 season. So yeah, again, Presley hasn't had the best start. Porter Hodge has had a pretty good start. 9 games into the season, I want to say they both have pitched either 2 or 3 times so far this year. So about as small sample size gets for relievers in general, but just especially with those two guys. Again, understand concerns with some of the bullpen arms and the way they've looked and just overall the numbers that the bullpen have. But very early on in the season, small sample. And I think when the Cubs made moves throughout the offseason, whether that is signing Brad Keller to a minor league deal or making the trade for Eli Morgan or getting Ryan Brazier or getting Ryan Presley, like a lot of the moves that the Cubs did make may not have been these super big moves that some other teams made, or like Tanner Scott would have been for him or would have felt like for him. But I do think the Cubs increased their depth with good arms in the bullpen. And I do think that over the long haul, that'll show. And then we'll see a guy like Ryan Presley look more like Ryan Presley as he's been for throughout his career and be a pretty solid back end option for the Cubs. So that's kind of where we're at the first 9 games. Bullpen hasn't looked great numbers wise, but I do expect that to improve. And they actually did have some pretty solid performances as a group over the last 3 games. Starters have had their struggles, like I mentioned, Steele, but like Shota's looked pretty good, of course. Ben Brown had a rough outing out of the bullpen in Tokyo, but then came back and had a pretty solid outing in his first start of the season. 5 innings pitched, 3 earned runs. Not the best, of course, but a pretty solid outing for him to start off his season. Matthew Boyd had 5 innings, no earned runs in his first start of the year. Shota's already through 2, has only given up 1 earned run. He's got a 0.82 ERA. Tyone bounced back from a rough start in his first time out there and did pretty well in Sacramento. And then Steele, I've mentioned, 12 earned runs so far through 3 starts, 6.89 ERA. But I do expect Justin Steele to improve and be more like Justin Steele that we've come to expect him to be the last couple seasons. And the offense, as I mentioned, has looked pretty good. The offense as a whole has looked pretty good. You got Kyle Tucker, Seiya Suzuki leading the way at the top of the lineup. The catchers are raking, and I don't know how much longer we expect them to do it at this kind of level, but look to be an improved group as a whole from what the Cubs had last season. Nico and Dansby, as I mentioned, have looked pretty good offensively to start the year. Michael Busch as well. Happ, Shaw, PCA, going to monitor what happens with them. But like Happ is a guy that you come to kind of not worry about early in the season. I think his March, April numbers have generally been his like worst numbers throughout his career. So Happ, I got faith in Happ that he's going to settle in and be that guy again once the season really gets going. Once we're a few weeks into the year, like Happ is going to be Happ is my opinion. By the end of the year, you're going to have pretty similar numbers from Happ that he's had the last couple of years. And I will mention that he's got a 15.2% walk rate, which is pretty high. And that's a good sign from him that he's at least still figuring out ways to get on base. Even though he's only hitting 184, he's still getting on base at a 304 clip. That's pretty solid for what that batting average number is. So the walk rate's still there. You're still seeing Happ be that hitter, have that same plate approach that we've seen from the last few years. And that's just, the way he hits, the way all these guys hit is just going to be what we're monitoring going forward. But I want to leave it off with kind of previewing what we got coming up this weekend. The Cubs are hosting the San Diego Padres, who are one of two undefeated teams left in Major League Baseball, along with the Dodgers. They swept the Braves over 3 games and then swept the Guardians over 4 games to get where they're at. But the Cubs are going up. They have Shota on opening day, the Cubs home opener. Shota Imanaga taking the mound against Randy Vasquez. Game 2 is Matthew Boyd versus Nick Pivetta, and Game 3 is Ben Brown versus Kyle Hart, who's someone that had he made a start at some point over the last week for the Padres and hadn't pitched prior to that in Major League Baseball since 2020. So that's the Cubs are somehow avoiding Michael King and Dylan Cease in Chicago at Wrigley Field for this series. That's a pretty good advantage for the Cubs that they don't have to face those two guys. And maybe we see the Cubs offense in this first series at Wrigley continue on what they've been doing the last few games and putting up runs. And then we'll see where the pitching's at. We'll see the starters if like Shota continues what he's done the first couple starts. If Ben Brown can build off things, if Matthew Boyd can build off that first good start. We're only 9 games in. We're only 9 games in, and you can't take too much from these first 9 games. You can't take too much of either which way. Like I understand Cubs fans having concerns about some of those things the first 9 games, but it is a long season. There's a lot of baseball left to play. There's 153 games left in the season, and a lot of things tend to even out over the year. Especially a guy like Ian Happ. I'm going to bring Ian Happ up again. I think you expect the numbers to even out and look a lot more like Ian Happ numbers by the end of the season. So that's just one example, but we're only 9 games in. It's hard for me. I understand Cubs fans having their concerns, but it's hard for me to take too much away from this first 9 games. You can look at it and you can dive into the numbers and see what the Cubs have done so far, but that ultimately doesn't mean on either good or bad. That also ultimately doesn't mean that's what the Cubs are going to be doing over the next 153 games. But I will say I am excited for opening day Friday morning. In my previous role as a Cubs beat writer, I was at the last 3 Cubs home openers, and it's always a lot of fun. Wrigleyville's packed. Wrigley Field's packed. Wrigleyville is people are crawling around Wrigleyville even earlier in the morning on a Friday morning going into Friday afternoon. Wrigleyville's fun. Wrigley Field is packed. It's a very fun, strong atmosphere. The Cubs are getting Shota Imanaga on the mound, who's arguably their best pitcher right now. Or well, he has performed like their best pitcher, but may arguably be their best pitcher, probably between him and Justin Steele. But he's a guy that had a really, really strong rookie season last season, coming over from NPB, and he's taking the mound for the Cubs home opener. And so it's going to be fun to watch. It's going to be fun to watch how Shota does, how the lineup performs when you got Kyle Tucker and Seiya Suzuki as hot as they've been the last few games. I'm looking forward to seeing the reception a guy like Kyle Tucker gets from the Cubs faithful, but also looking forward to seeing the reception that Matt Shaw gets in his first game playing at Wrigley Field with the Cubs uniform on. That's what I'm looking forward to. It's going to be a fun day. It's going to be a fun day, and for the Cubs, who have the playoff expectations, they have the on paper best team in the NL Central. I mean, I looked at Fangraphs just before recording this. They do still have a 52.7% playoff odds from Fangraphs, 44.5% odds to win the division. This is still a team with major playoff expectations or major playoff goals, and I honestly, like, at least for me, like real playoff expectations. Like I expect to be sitting here in October with the Cubs playing October baseball. May not happen in the end, but that's what we'll find out 153 games from now. But the Cubs will continue on this journey of the 2025 season, 5-4 after 9 games, and going into the home opener against the San Diego Padres. It's gonna be a fun one, and I'm looking forward. I'll be there. So if you see me, if you want to say hi, go ahead and do that. I'm friendly. I like to talk to people, so don't be afraid to stop me and say hi if you'd like. But whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on podcasts, please like, subscribe, tell your friends about the podcast. Let's keep growing this thing. Me and Herb Lawrence, my guy doing the Sox shows, on the Addison the 35th podcast. Let's keep growing this thing, and we appreciate the support you've already given us, but we'd appreciate even more support from you guys along the way. That'll do it for this episode of the Addison the 35th podcast. I will have another one coming up soon for you Cubs fans, and recapping another series of the Cubs' first series at Wrigley Field. Until then, we'll see you later.